Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I'm with Mark Brennan. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that we are still situated on the field at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, Indiana, home of the Big Ten Football Media Days going on from Tuesday through Thursday. We're fresh out of it on Wednesday, early evening now. And Mark, this day was Penn State's opportunity to enter the spotlight. Yesterday brought a crew of teams. Tomorrow will bring a crew of teams. But this is where we got to dive into the details a bit. James Franklin up at the main podium, and then later available for a breakout session with more of the local beat. And then we also had Tyler Warren, senior tight end, safety Jaylen Reed, also a senior, and then a third senior, and Dvon J-Thomas, formerly known as Devon Ellies. And we'll get into some of the feedback from those guys. But, Mark, you've been covering this event for decades. It's had some different destinations. You and I were side by side in Chicago my first year covering it. But here we are. We're kind of coming up for air after doing a lot of work the last 9-10 hours here in the stadium. What stood out to you today?
I just think the three guys who are here, I think, represented them very well. Not that we expected anything different, but for people who didn't see it yet on the site, you have to go to our site. Tyler got one-on-one interviews thanks to our friends at CBS with all three players, and you're going to get some insight into these guys that maybe you haven't had before. I thought that was really cool to be able to work with our partners at CBS and really reap the benefits of that. I think is tremendous. James Franklin. He was typical James Franklin. The one thing that disappoints me a little bit about this, we get a lot of access to James during the season, but at this event, typically the coaches will meet in a scrum style with local reporters afterward, and James doesn't do that. So I don't know why. I've never really asked him why. I guess maybe we should at some point. But then it sounds like you're complaining about access. Yeah. But that's actually a cool thing because when they get up on the podium, and I'm trying to explain it. There's a giant main stage where James and all the coaches talk. Sorry.
There it is. Yeah. You can see it if you're watching on YouTube. I just turned the camera, and there's the Big Ten Network set ahead of us.
The breakaways.
And then the breakaway press conferences. So for those of you who are not watching this, you're probably a little confused, but we're just showed the whole scope of the indoor setup here in Indianapolis.
So he'll go up on the main stage, and then he'll end up going to the breakout thing. And that's where actually, I mean, it struck me odd that a reporter who covers a different team hammered in with the first question. It's like typically you give an ounce of respect to the local beat writers that cover the team, and no, that wasn't happening. I mean, that went completely out the window. But so he met with us. He actually was supposed to talk for 45 minutes. I think he went almost 47 minutes.
Okay,
which there's something to be said for that. But he was good. I mean, he answered all the questions, threw everything at him, and I thought handled himself well. It's a good event. I'm on record. I prefer when this was in Chicago, just because they're able to move it around to different locations in Chicago, to different convention areas and that sort of thing. This is at Lucas Oil Stadium. We're actually down on the field. It's a mess. I mean, I don't know if they just had a monster truck race in here or what, but there's dirt all over the place. You're getting these little AstroTurf, things in your shoes. So I know that's a lot of complaining, but coming out of this, I would say Penn State guys handled themselves well. Franklin did a nice job. Don't know that there was any serious breaking news outside of, I thought the thing that stood out to me the most was,
we'll
see if we're on the same page.
I think just to get James on the record about several lingering injury issues at this point was pretty big. And then I think the fact that we now have it on the record from James that Abdul Carter is not limited to a specific spot, that he is in play on a week-to-week basis to be at defensive end or linebacker. It's the first time he's put that out.
Yeah, it makes complete sense, too, because you look at the kind of impact player that he can be. And it was actually kind of funny because I just overheard somebody else podcasting or doing whatever they were doing. They were saying, I really think this move to defensive end for Abdul Carter is going to be the best thing for him. Well, he's actually not just going to play defensive end. He's going to play linebacker and defensive end. So we're going to have to figure out what to call him. But I think it makes a lot of sense because he's one of your best players. And they have so much depth at defensive end that I don't think you want to pigeonhole him to just playing that position. Get him out there playing the linebacker positions. It could change from week to week depending on who the opponent is. But he's one of your best players. The only Penn State player who made the preseason watch list, is that what they called it? He deserved it. Should some other guys have maybe gotten a look? We could debate that. But I think Abdul Carter learning that he's going to play defensive end and linebacker, I think is a big thing for this team.
Yeah, and speaking with Jaylen Reed this morning in one of those exclusive interviews that we do have up, all three of those videos with Reed, Warren, and Dvon J-Thomas over at Lines 24/7. But Reed made a direct comparison between Abdul Carter's get-off and his ability to affect things off the edge to what Chop Robinson was able to accomplish last year on his way to being, top half of the first-round NFL draft pick. And that's largely where we've seen Abdul Carter in some of these way too early mock drafts for 2025. And I this is certainly some gamesmanship as well to keep West Virginia on their on their toes. But I think really, Tyler Warren talked about it. I said, Tyler, if you're preparing for someone like Abdul Carter and you're not sure where he's going to line up from you that Saturday, and it's Tuesday and it's Wednesday and it's Thursday, what is that doing to preparation? He just says it's going to be time consuming for the opponents. And it's something that they're still not going to be able to lock down, play to play, series to series. And so James Franklin called Abdul Carter one of the most explosive players in college football. They obviously think that the launch pad is in place for him to ascend as a national force. And Mark, last year, I think we felt like that with Abdul Carter. It really took until November, in my opinion, where we saw him really gain that momentum and pick up kind of where he left off as a freshman. Right now, it sounds like all systems are go. So I think the expectation is wherever he is attacking the Mountaineers offense from on August 31st, that he is going to be one of the most impactful and important players on the field for Penn State.
Yeah, remember he has that wager going with Chop Robinson that he's going to have more sacks than Chop had last year. I forget how many Chop had, but
didn't have a bunch.
Yeah, he didn't have a bunch. Actually, I think he said he's going to have like 15 or something. I think they were going at it at Pro Day. It was actually pretty funny, but it was in a good-natured way. The other thing, Tyler, that kind of we keep hearing more and more, we first heard about it from Dex, Anthony Poindexter, the safeties coach, back when we had a chance to talk to them. What month was that? Was that
Dex? In June.
Yeah, that was in June. And he actually said he referred to Zakee Wheatley as their third starting safety.
Yeah.
And we got more of that today about how they plan to go. Jaylen Reed talked about it. Franklin talked about it. So it's going to be interesting to see how much of that, do they actually come out? I suppose they could against certain teams with three starting safeties, but that's another thing from today that we kind of had a sense for when Dex let it out of the bag back when we talked to him. But, both the fact that both Reed and Franklin addressed it today, I thought was pretty telling.
Reed is incredibly high on their top three safeties, as is everybody within the program right now. Wheatley's been maybe the most buzzed about defensive back this offseason. And then KJ Winston, everybody's kind of pointing to him as a future All-American, a future first-round prospect for a couple years now. And he started to show what that's about as a first-year starter. And with that line position, Jaylen Reed says he'll be playing back deep a lot. But you're right. When they roll out their standard defense this year, is it going to be Jaylen Reed alongside Kobe King and Tony Rojas with Zakee Wheatley and KJ Winston back deep? There's a lot of compelling stuff. We heard from Manny Diaz. I'm sure we'll hear from Tom Allen about getting your best 11 on the football field. And there's some positionless aspects to what they're doing right now, the creativity, and it's pretty exciting. And so when we look ahead to preseason camp, I want to get into the injury topic here.
Yeah,
because
one other thing on Jaylen Reed, if I could. Deservedly so, his feet were put to the fire today over a very important topic.
Yes.
The fact that he mistakenly did not opt into EA Sports College Football 25. And he said that he got flack from his teammates over that because they want to play Penn State and it's a bot in his position.
Yeah.
And so he fessed up. He was kind of sheepish about it. Like he went to play it, and he can't play with him.
He's been playing a lot. He's been playing a lot.
That's obviously on a lighter note, but it is kind of funny. These guys are taking this game like way serious, like way serious. These players are really into it. And listen, I think it's a cool thing. They have an opportunity to make a little bit of money, very little bit, all things considered. But to actually have their names in this game, I think is cool just for their brands and that sort of thing. But all the guys talked about it, and they're all three are pretty much into it. I did ask Dvon L.E., so I kind of set him up, I'm sorry, Dvon J-Thomas. Sorry, Dvon.
And we can get to that right now before we forget to. I asked Dvon before we got into any football stuff, hey, you recently changed your name, but we haven't gotten any feedback on why that happened. So we brought it up to him. So Thomas is paternal family name, and then Jennings is his maternal family name, and so that's what the J represents. We don't have the full scope of this exactly, why it wasn't Thomas, from the get, but Dvon told us as much as he was willing to.
Yeah, he's doing it to honor his parents.
And he says talked about it for a while, but it's interesting. He basically said he feels like he's at a point where he's coming out to a Big Ten Media Day, where he's one of the faces of Penn State football program and someone who wants to be in the NFL next year, where he said his name's out there and he wants it to be the right name. And so I'm sure that topic will come up as we get a chance to speak with Dvon later in the summer. Others will ask about it, but just a little bit a note there, because we've mentioned a few times that he changed his name. We didn't really know why, but to honor his family there. And by the way, Tyler Warren said he's been trying to force himself the ball, throwing too many interceptions, trying to force it to number 44 himself in that game.
Well, then he was asked, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that something else about Reed, but
then Tyler Warren was asked, are you going to try to play quarterback? Why don't you play quarterback? Because he was a high school quarterback.
Yeah.
But then the thing about Dvon, I said, how integral is Jaylen Reed to this defense? And he goes on about how versatile he is. So I said, then what level of disappointment was there for you that this defense in EA Sports is lacking him? And he was pretty smooth about it. He goes, oh, no, we have great backup safeties. Yeah. He said, now if somebody gets banged up and I have to put the bot in, it's an issue. So that's one of the cool things about this, is it's not all super serious. Yeah, there are serious topics that are discussed, positional things that we were talking about, X's and O's. But the other cool thing, Tyler, and I got to throw this out, and we're just riffing here. I mean, this is just
if it isn't clear already.
Yeah, we're ad-libbing. There's no script here. I came in as you were doing the final interview. It's kind of a small studio type thing. And Dvon comes in and he sees you and he sees me and he's like, oh, some familiar faces finally. I'm happy to see some familiar faces. So that part of it's really cool, because, sometimes I think you take for granted that you cover these guys all the time and that maybe they don't have a level of appreciation for you. And the fact that he said that to me, not that we're looking for appreciation or anything like that, but I think you could understand how it's pretty cool when a player like that, a guy who's trending toward being a team captain, first thing he says when he walks in the room with these CBS execs is, oh, it's good to see some familiar faces. So that was pretty cool. Yeah,
and they do get put through the car wash a bit here with some national media stuff, and there's all sorts of questions. The one other thing I was going to note on Jaylen Reed, he predicted, he called his shot a little bit, which he's right. He says he's going to end up 86, 87 rating is his guess, which would put him pretty comfortably inside the top 10 of this roster. He's not a fan of the CPU safety, though. He's not a fan of the bot that's taking his place. But moving on.
It's his fault. It's your own fault, Jaylen.
He's going to get a nice payday from it. He's going to get a free game, and he's going to regret not doing it earlier. So moving on from virtual football to real football, which will be on the fields at Penn State in just about a week and a half now, Mark, for preseason camp. We got a bit of an update from James Franklin on different members of this roster who exited spring ball, sideline, guys who have publicly been acknowledged as going through some kind of injury issue. So we'll work our way through that, just reaffirming that Drew Shelton is good to go. It's not a surprise. We knew that in June, but James was asked about that, Shelton's status, and he said they have a lot of confidence in him going out there and competing. We know that Javen Williams was able to bulk up on reps at left tackle with him sidelined this spring, but he's full go. We knew that. Zariah Fisher is somebody who came out of spring camp sideline. Unfortunately, that's 2 times in 3 years, Mark, where he's got a long-term injury issue. Franklin said they do expect to have him back this season. I'm thinking back to 2022. He got back on the field, I think, for 2 matchups late in the year. He does have COVID eligibility in his back pocket. Frankly, he could apply for a hardship waiver considering these two seasons if he doesn't play enough this year. But that aside, it's unfortunate because he's somebody that we heard quite a bit of buzz about during winter workouts. He was routinely pointed to by Deion Barnes as someone who was really thriving here as a year 5 guy. Remember, he came to campus as a linebacker, missed the whole season along the way. So it was really good to hear that. And so that's all been kind of put on pause. And in the same aspect, Keon Wiley is somebody that we heard really good things about early on in spring ball, carving out a role maybe on the 2 deep at linebacker. He's a redshirt sophomore, a guy that was banged up, though, essentially missed April with an injury. We didn't get looks at him through the blue-white game. And James Franklin kind of the same deal. It sounded like, where they expect him back this season, but there's not a lot of clarity there. Not necessarily a guy that I think we're going to see at the start of August on the practice field. And you continue working your way around there, and it's kind of more of the same. Jackson Smolik, redshirt freshman quarterback. He was QB3 last year. He played 2 total snaps, got in for 1 matchup. He was injured during spring ball. That got a bunch of work to the freshman, Ethan Grunkemeyer, who was a top 24/7 talent, actually a top 100 talent in the last class. And so we expect Grunkemeyer to get a chance to work a lot more in that QB3 role in August, because James Franklin says that Smolik is deep into the process. He's handling it well mentally, but he's just not quite to the point where he's going to be out there involved in the field. And Franklin brought up an interesting point as well, where it involves some of these guys. They have a restricted number that they can work with during preseason camp. So they ultimately, as a staff, medical, coaching, need to get together and say, is this guy going to be on our camp roster? If he's not available until October, November, might not be the prudent thing to do. If it's a situation where the player is going to be available for you in mid-September, well, you probably want to make sure that they're full go with you in fall camp. But a few notes there, and then a really optimistic outlook, I thought, regarding Josiah Brown, who we've been pretty hesitant to discuss much here on the podcast. He's one of the 3 freshman wide receivers. Tyseer Denmark, Peter Gonzalez came later, more recently. He was here in January, but Josiah Brown last October suffered a serious knee injury, cut his high school senior season short. James Franklin was actually at that matchup where the injury occurred. And so although he got a head start in a lot of ways at Penn State, he didn't get to do that on the practice field and really get to kind of work his way toward a situation where he's already got his feet underneath him as a receiver before his first preseason camp. But James Franklin says he's got feedback from Josiah himself that he's 100%. He says the first time he's heard that from Josiah. And so, 9 months out of a really serious injury in his senior year, it sounds like we're going to get an opportunity when we get back on the practice field to see him go out there running some routes. And we all know the story with this receiver room. The door is wide open for just about everybody. Now he's going to have rust to knock off. He's going to have to get ingrained with Power 4 competition, dealing with these defensive backs, dealing with his role. But that was really good to hear from James Franklin, that there wasn't any hesitancy in his answer. Josiah Brown's going to be part of the plan when they get back into practice mode. But, just some updates there. So, that's going to –
The other thing about Smolik is he mentioned that it's I thought – were you reading it that it was the same injury that he had in high school? Or
no,
was just saying that it was he had a difficult injury in high school and he's been through it before.
Yeah, he had mentioned that because Smolik had to endure a similar situation in high school. I believe it was his junior year, and it was a big reason why he wasn't heavily recruited until later in the process. And I believe it was a broken collarbone at that point. If I recall correctly, doing some gandering with our binoculars at the blue-white game, it was more of a lower body situation. But again, so you got a situation where Ethan Grunkemeyer is really going to get a chance to establish himself a little bit more through high volume of reps. And I know that you think about the future at quarterback, and people are high on Grunkemeyer, and so this is an opportunity for him. While it's a lost opportunity for Smolik, this is a good chance for Grunkemeyer. That's the way football works. That's the way rosters work. And then we've just got to note that between the Zariah Fisher absence, the Keon Wiley absence, and the fact that you've got Abdul Carter kind of sort of in both of those rooms, it sounds like, there's depth is going to have to be addressed, and you're going to need some of these other guys, whether it's a younger component or a veteran like a Smith Vilbert, someone who's been waiting for his turn. There's going to need to be some solutions there as they work through August.
Yeah, Dvon was talking up Smith Vilbert, which you would expect because they came in together.
Yeah, back in 2019.
Hakeem Beeman was in that class as well, and
Sal Wormley.
Yeah, they're going to have options at the end. I don't think that's going to end up being a tremendous issue for them. The quarterback situation, I also thought it was interesting that he once again went back and talked about Bo Pribula.
Yeah.
And, he was asked about, Andy Kotelnicki's statement about getting the best players on the field, and are there ways to do, how does Bo kind of fit into that? And
I'll give a little more context here, because Kotelnicki, this is back in June when we had a lot of coaches available for us at Haluba Hall in Happy Valley, and Kotelnicki was asked about Pribula, and he was talking about, we need to prioritize getting our best weapons on the field. And he was asked directly, is Bo Pribula one of your best weapons? And he said yes. So that leads you to believe, okay, what's the plan here? And then that's popped up again today.
Yeah, but the whole best weapon thing, I mean, it seems as if they're going to figure out, and Franklin said you saw it in the last couple of games of the season, and boy, I mean, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this.
But we saw it with mixed results, didn't we? I mean,
yeah.
we saw some really good things in the Michigan State matchup. Bo Prabul, I think, threw a touchdown, ran for a touchdown. And then we saw them lose like 11 yards on a trick play in the Peach Bowl where you got Drew throwing to Bo or Bo throwing to Drew. I forget what that was.
But my point being that Franklin is still upset about them not using getting their best weapons on the field last year.
It's getting less subtle. It's getting less subtle when James Franklin looks back at the 2023 season and does a bit of an autopsy.
And that's a good point. Maybe he needed to step back, and when you saw that. Mm-hmm. Because when would they have had an opportunity to really dive into that before the end of camps?
Something that Franklin was talking about in the post-game press conference after the Michigan game on Black Friday last November, when they were 2 games removed from firing Yurcich. I'm still fairly young, and so Franklin that time, he said, "Well, we are now getting to the basics where if a player is able to fill a role for us, we want to put that guy in a position to succeed. We're going to simplify this. We're gonna kind of tailor this offense to our roster strengths, our player strengths versus what our scheme is. And this is a scheme and everything's got to fit in it. And so everything you've heard about Andy Kotelnicki is that, right? It's about maximizing what you have. And I just keep thinking that every time James Franklin alludes to something he wasn't thrilled about in 2023, it's getting less subtle and it's getting a little bit more. You can kind of understand some of the emotions that were probably in play in mid-November last year and some of the frustrations that were in play. Franklin actually said he thought it was football 101 to get your players involved and highlight their strengths, and he just didn't feel like they had it last year. So you can read into it a little bit of a dig at Yurcich, but again, I think really the overwhelming thing for me is hearing from Franklin, hearing from Tyler Warren, and hearing from the offensive players that we've talked to going back to spring ball is there's just a different energy around this offense. They feel like they're freer, they're looser, they're having more fun. There's more opportunities for more guys. And, will that translate to more points? I don't know, but I can just tell you it's a different way of talking about offensive structure, not just what happens on the practice field, but what they are doing on a daily basis.
You think of where Kotelnicki's been, Buffalo and Kansas. And I mean, frankly, not the kind of programs where you're getting every single player that you want. So you're getting the best players you can you're trying to get the best players you can, and you're not able to fit them into a system, so you have to move the system around them. I think ideally you would like to be able to have the best of both worlds. You want to get the elite players, but also have enough flexibility, and clearly he was not happy with their offensive flexibility last year, because I think they were very flexible over on defense. I think Manny Diaz, that was one of his strengths, was being able to find out who are the guys who are playmakers, and whether it was Daquan Hardy or Jaylen Reed or whoever back there, putting them in different spots, seeing defensive backs sacking, seeing defensive ends dropping back into coverage and doing things. So I think that's still grinding at him about last season. But let's see what happens when they play West Virginia, because as Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. So let's see how that works out.
I wanted to go back over to freshman receivers really quickly, because I asked James Franklin about that group, that trio, and he initially said, look, I'm kind of relying on feedback from position coaches and other players right now. Obviously, they haven't had a practice with Tysier Denmark or Peter Gonzalez. They won't until August. But he did then continue to say that there is legitimate buzz around Tysier Denmark right now, and speaking with people at program facilities. And we've picked up on that. We've talked about it on the podcast. Yeah. But it's one thing for me and Daniel Gallen to say, oh, there's buzz around Tysier Denmark. It's another for James Franklin 10 days before preseason camp to say there is buzz around Tysier Denmark. And so you still take it with a grain of salt, because he's got to go out there and produce in a practice setting. But we hear that, and then we also hear that Peter Gonzalez, more of the same regarding him, physically up to the task of what awaits him on the practice field in August. 6'2", 205 pounds, big, strong. Both him and Anthony Specca have earned some praise for how they showed up from Pittsburgh Central Catholic this summer. And so we've talked about, I have a list of the 10 newcomers most likely to make an impact here in 2024. Those 2 are on it. I didn't include Josiah Brown because he's coming off that injury. But to me, I mean, the door is wide open for these guys. It really is. And the one thing working against them is time. They've got 3 weeks before the team shifts gears and goes into game week mode, and they stay in game week mode for the next several months. So It doesn't necessarily mean that if they don't make the cut to be rotational pieces on August 31st, that they won't be there in October. But they got to make the most of these 3 weeks because it comes in a hurry. We don't see it happen often where a guy shows up at this position later in the year and makes it. Jahan Dotson did it in 2018. But really, I mean, I'm thinking of some of the other guys. It's been early enrollee players. Omari Evans a couple years ago, he showed up in January. Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith, they enrolled early. They dealt with COVID, so that was a whole different situation. But this is a spot where time is against both of these guys. But based on what James Franklin said today, for as much as he could say, matched up with a lot of what we've heard about those two and gives me more reason to believe that we need to keep them as part of that conversation about receivers who could be on the field August 31st.
Well, he also repeated that if you're good enough, you're going to play no matter what class you're in. And we've seen that with, a guy like Pat Fryermuth. I know he's not a receiver, but, as a tight end, he was a summer enrollee who came in and was just that good, that fast. So are these guys able to do that? That might be a little bit of a stretch because he was a special player. But the other receiver he talked about, obviously, Julian Fleming.
Yeah.
And this was about as effusive in his praise as he's been of Julian. He was very measured about his on-field stuff. He's always been very positive about Fleming from the, everything other than football perspective. Mm-hmm. But he, talking about how he's in the best shape of his life. He's as fast as he's been, has been a team leader. He told us some of these things before about how he kind of let that leadership role come to him. He didn't come and try to beat people over the head with it, but he earned it. And to me, I think that's a really good sign that if you're going to, I don't know that we've ever seen, everything that Julian Fleming can be. And I think you can hold out hope. I'm not saying he's going to be the answer, but I just like what I'm hearing at this point. And knock on wood that he is able to stay healthy, because I would really like to see, a 100% Julian Fleming and what he's able to do in the Big Ten.
And I think Franklin knows anything he says about Julian Fleming. I mean, there's Ohio State beat reporters there. It's going to get around. It's going to circulate. So he does not just throw those kind of comments out there. And when it comes to Fleming, because he also was asked about Fleming when he was up on the main podium earlier. And here's what he said. He said that he has really come to campus motivated, and he said a huge chip on his shoulder. And so when he said huge chip on his shoulder, I followed up to ask James what that meant. And James said it's, when you come out of high school and you're the number one wide receiver in the country and you're a five-star guy, you have a vision for what it's going to look like for the next 5 years of your life. And he actually kind of married the two, in Nolan Rucci and Julian Fleming on this topic, and said to this point, to different degrees, externally, that hasn't been viewed as them reaching their ceiling in football, and internally, both those guys know they have more to give the game. And so I think to hear the health thing, and we heard from Julian himself that this is the healthiest he's been all in an offseason since he got to the college level. But to hear from James Franklin that it's more than just him being healthy. He's looking explosive. He's looking fast, because we know that Julian Fleming is strong and big and he can block. What I have been wondering, and I think a lot of our listeners probably have too, is the Julian Fleming that we saw in Southern Columbia High School coming out of that everybody wanted, including James Franklin, and we all thought this is going to be a big play waiting to happen kind of player. That wasn't who he was at Ohio State, even when he was at his best. And so I'm wondering, do we really maybe see more of that from Julian Fleming? I've been kind of rationalizing as like Mitchell Tinsley 2.0 would work just fine for this offense and what they need right now.
But maybe there's a chance.
But this Franklin being this effusive, as you said, and some of the other things we've heard about Fleming, I'm still, I guess, not going to put it on the back burner that he can be a wide receiver one type. I've been saying that's going to be Harrison Wallace. We got to see if Julian Fleming can earn a starting role first. But I just continue to hear the feedback on this kid, and not a kid anymore. He's 22. And I'm starting to, let myself buy into it more and more that he can be somebody.
I think there's a chance. Mm-hmm. I think if, he came in, and I don't think Franklin is going to be saying these things unless they're accurate. Mm-hmm. Chuck Losey told us good things about him. So I just think I remember watching him, and, it could be a little tricky watching a kid from Southern Columbia, because that's not a big school. Mm-hmm. and it's not playing elite competition, but we saw him in 7-on-7 camps against
Yeah.
DeMatha. That DeMatha team had like 2 or 3 D1 defensive backs, and he was just
Yeah.
running right
I
by
mean,
them.
he went to national camp circuits. It's not like everything we saw from him was in a Southern
And
Columbia
that's why
uniform.
I don't understand how that guy who was running by everybody ends up not. And then, well, maybe it was the injuries. Maybe
Constantly
he
hurt.
Yeah, he couldn't get past it.
We've talked about him sharing the receiver room at Ohio State with a bunch of future first-round picks, Heisman Trophy contenders, and all that. But Julian Fleming, I mean, even when I spoke to him back in, right before he enrolled, he kept saying, man, I just haven't been healthy. I just haven't been able to stay healthy. It's been one thing, it's been the next. And so even when he was playing, starting 20 games at Ohio State, I was talking to a Buckeyes insider last night. You could see he was grimacing after points of. I mean, you could see he was battling through it. So we hope, knock on wood, that Julian Fleming will be able to get through August healthy, and we'll get to see what that looks like. He's got to be able to do that first, though. So. But encouraging words from James Franklin on Julian Fleming. And I think anything that's encouraging in the receiver situation right now, you kind of want to take and embrace it because that's a spot that everyone's just kind of concerned about when you look at Penn State's status as a college football playoff contender. What else are we want to make sure we address here? I think something else that was interesting kind of off the path of personnel and roster and depth chart is the potential for 2 whiteouts this year, because James Franklin said they're adamant about only having 1 whiteout during the regular season, but the question was posed to him if Penn State were to get a first-round home game in the playoffs, and that's going to require a successful regular season, but would they be interested in a whiteout? And he pretty quickly was like, this is something I could wrap my mind around. Like, this is something we'd have to sit down and discuss. He said between Pat Kraft and maybe Mother Nature, because this is the weekend before Christmas, it could be a whiteout, the likes that no one has seen before. And I just thought it was fun to hear James Franklin take the question, run with it a little bit, because so often it's hard to get him to talk about a matchup, third week of September this time of year.
When you're in the playoff.
Yeah. So I thought that was fun to think about, and a lot of this is fun when you've got Oregon and USC and UCLA and Washington entering the mix in a 12-team playoff, and you can land in all these different campuses. And so that is an aspect that I appreciated today, just hearing him kind of be like, yeah, that's something that we could potentially roll with, and it's definitely going to be under consideration.
Well, I know that if there's a chance of that happening, maybe we should get a bunch of Lions 247 white winter coats that people could buy, because there's going to be a market. I'm looking around here and I'm seeing like processions of people starting to walk out. So if we have to wrap quickly,
it's because the security guards
because we're getting thrown out of the building. I don't think we're at that point yet, but just in case.
Well, I don't think we have too much more to go on. I mean, we're gonna have a ton of coverage. There already is a lot of coverage over at Lions 24/7. We've got videos, interviews of all 3 of those players. We got full 47-minute session with James Franklin there that you can view for yourself instead of just hearing the feedback from us. And we're gonna have a lot of stories coming out of this regarding a bunch of different topics. But is there anything that we want to make sure we hit on here before we close up shop and say goodbye to Lucas Oil Stadium?
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention is we had a chance last night to meet with some of the folks from our UCLA and USC sites. And I've known some of these people before. Some of them aren't here at this, but some of their staffers are. And Washington and Oregon will be here tomorrow as we tape this on Wednesday. And I would just like to remind people, especially if you're a VIP subscriber, go check out those sites. They're all really good sites. They do a really good job there. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of the traditional Big Ten type sites, but there are some really good former Pac-12 sites. All those schools have strong sites on our network. So be sure to check them out. It was funny because somebody who shall remain nameless kept talking about being here at Pac-12 Media Days. I won't say who that was, but they kept, this is, covering Pac-12 Media Days. He's like, oh man, no, man, Big Ten Media Days. So it's a little difficult for everybody to wrap their heads around. But seeing Lincoln Riley walking around here, and it wasn't the best day for Foster.
Deshaun Foster had a little bit of a whoopsie daisy moment on the stage.
He struggled. He struggled a little bit, but just seeing the people from the different schools, the players, the coaches, and the beat writers. Yeah. So it's pretty cool. I mean, a lot of good reporters cover the Big Ten. And I think you're going to see a lot of good writers and video people and whatever
Yeah.
coming in who cover these other schools.
And Penn State gets a big dose of those Pac-12 transplants this year. They get 3 out of the 4. Washington, of course, is the home whiteout matchup. They go out to USC in October, mid-October, to really launch a crucial stretch of their season. A couple weeks before that, UCLA visits Beaver Stadium. So it's real. It's kind of, for me, set it in that we have reached the next level in Big Ten coverage. And here we go. Ready or not, it's going to be a completely new situation. 18 teams, no divisions, 4 instead of 4 playoff spots, you got 12. So a whole world of possibilities have opened up for teams like Penn State. And it's just something that we'll continue to talk about on the podcast week to week. We'll check in with our 24/7 sports analysts. And when we get to those West Coasters, we'll have them on. We already had a USC insider on earlier this month to break down that matchup and the Trojans transition. But that we'll leave that for the season. Mark, you and I are heading back this week to Happy Valley. I'm heading out on vacation on Friday. I'm going to be out for next week, but we do have some plans to maybe give you a little bit of a podcast show despite that fact, so stay tuned for that. But when we resume and regather, we're back at Beaver Stadium. It's preseason media day, and we are off and running.
I'm happy it's here. I mean, July up until this point is kind of slow. I mean, June was obviously massive on the recruiting front for Penn State, all the camps that we cover, which is a lot of fun. And then those first couple weeks of July are relatively slow. And to dive back into it at an event like this is really cool. So looking forward to it.
Tell that to Tyler Calvaruso. The man was very busy in the start of July.
Well, I said from our perspective, from a recruiting perspective, it's always cooking. But from our perspective, that's when the coaches actually, I mean, that's one other thing we could mention is, the coaches take vacation and then they go on their annual retreat. And James Franklin was able to give us some insight into why they do those retreats every year, dating back to when he was an assistant with the Packers. The coach there did it, and he felt it's a good way for these coaches to connect, not just about X's and O's, but he said, if you don't do that sort of thing and you have as much turnover as there is in college football, you go a couple of years and all of a sudden nobody knows anybody.
Yeah, it's very important from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah. So I think going back to that whole, clearly the dynamic in at least one area of the staff last year wasn't particularly good. And I think he's fighting to make sure that it's better all around this year.
Well, we are going to be back with you again for preseason camp. We got a lot of coverage coming your way at Lions247.com. We do have a big recruiting weekend coming up, too, to finish off July. I'm going to be on vacation for it. Sorry, guys. But our Lions 24/7 coverage team will be there. Camp action. Lash Bash, which is always an annual event. Tyler Calvaruso has done a great job over at Lions 24/7, confirming some of those guests, previewing the impact as these prospects makes the trip to Happy Valley for the final recruiting event of the summer. So stay tuned on that, Lions247.com, 30% off a VIP subscription. It's a great time to get on board now because preseason camp coverage is going to be a lot, and it's going to be coming real soon. So, Mark, it's been a pleasure. It always is.
Yeah. Safe travels.
And so for Mark Brennan, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been Lions 24/7 team coverage out at Indianapolis, Lucas Oil Stadium. Again, follow Lions247.com for a bunch more coming out of this event in the next few days. For now, though, we're stepping aside. We'll talk to you real soon on the Lions 24/7 podcast.